Matthew chapter 25. That's where we're going to be in our study here this morning. If you haven't already, the outline for chapter 26 is on the back table. You can pick that up as you leave here this morning to have that for our study on Wednesday of Matthew 26. But we're ready for Matthew chapter 25. Very quickly going to go through our review as we have been. If we have time on Wednesday, we may spend some time on our chapter content, but again, we've got several long chapters left, and I think our plans are we'll try to finish the book, a chapter a study, and then we'll be able to, that last Sunday here, do a full review of the book on that Sunday beforehand, so we can review all that chapter content then. So, we're going to go straight into chapter 25. I'll just quickly remind you of our outline. We're in the third section on Jesus in Jerusalem. In fact, we're in the last period. This is the chronology of the life of Christ. We're in that last week of the life of Christ, and we are still on Tuesday. Lord willing, Wednesday, we're going to finally make it out of Tuesday. We've been in Tuesday. Well, for us, we've been in Tuesday for several weeks now because several chapters span that day of controversy, starting back in chapter at the end of 21, all of 22, 23, 24, and 25 are part of that day of controversy, that Tuesday of the last week of the life of Christ. I'm going to skip over this again. If we have time Wednesday, we may cover that. We'll see. We've got a lot of material on Wednesday we'll have to cover as well in chapter 26. We're ready for 25, the Messiah on the judgment. Quickly, giving a summary of the chapter. We've got three things here. We've got the parable of the 10 virgins, the parable of the talents, and the judgment scene taking place in this chapter. Question number 2, what is our key verse to the chapter? Verses 31 and 32, when the Son of Man comes in His glory and all the holy angels with Him, then He who will sit on the throne of His glory, all the nations will be gathered before Him. He will separate them one from another as a shepherd divides his sheep from the goats. And so He's talking about in judgment how there'll be separation of those who are righteous and the unrighteous as a shepherd divides the sheep from the goats. We'll talk about that when we get to verse 31. Question number 3, what is the main theme throughout this chapter? What are we dealing with in this chapter over and over again? Judgment. Judgment and the end of time. Go back to 24 for just a minute. We studied this on Wednesday in Matthew 24. Remember, Matthew 24, we talked about this in detail. We spent most of our time on the first half of the book the chapter, because there's two events in Matthew 24. The first event that the first 34 verses are dedicated to is what? Matthew 24, the first 34 verses is the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. And so that's what Jesus deals with in the first 34 verses. Verse 35 marks the transition between the two. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will by no means pass away. The point in verse 35 is you can trust what I'm saying. My words aren't going to pass away. But He says they're not going to pass away even though what passes away? Verse 35. Heaven and earth. Verse 36, but of that day. What day? When heaven and earth pass away. That day and hour no one knows. Then He talks about the end of time. We're coming now to 25. We're still dealing with judgment and the end of time. So verse 25, chapter 25, verse 1, he's going to talk about the parable of the 10 virgins. So question 4, summarize the parable of the 10 virgins. What's taking place in these verses? Being prepared and not being prepared. And being prepared, excuse me, being prepared and staying prepared. I think we learned that in this as well. But one of the things, too, I want to draw your attention to before we go into this, one of the things Jesus is dealing with in this chapter, particularly in the first 2, is about staying faithful even in delay. And what do I mean by that? Well, let's go back to chapter 24 and verse 48. The parable we ended 24 with, we dealt with this quickly, but look at verse 48. But if that evil servant says in his heart, my master is what? Delayed in his coming. Let's go to chapter 25. Verse 5, but while the bridegroom was delayed. Go to verse 19 now. Verse 19. And after a long time, the Lord of those servants came and settled the accounts. So you stay faithful and ready all the time, even if he seems to be delayed. Not in the sense that he had to postpone his coming, but delayed in the sense that to us, he's not come yet. Is he really coming? You stay faithful even if you think he's delayed. So now let's go to verse 1 beginning. Then the kingdom of heaven, there's our phrase, our key phrase. Here's occurrence 31. Occurs 32 times. Here's number 31. The kingdom of heaven shall be likened to 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. Now let me give you a little bit of historical context. What would happen here for the Jews, when one would get married, the bridegroom would go get the bride and bring her with him back to his house, and they would have a feast. They would have this party. That's what we're talking about, what Jesus is using in the illustration here. Those who were going with them, sort of the parade on the way, had to have their lamps. If you had your lamp, didn't have your lamp, couldn't be part of the parade. And even if you somehow got in the parade, when you got to the house, you weren't allowed in. So that was common for the Jews, that's what would take place. So now let's go to verse 21 again. It shall be likened to 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. They're wanting to go be part of the feast. 5 of them were wise and 5 were foolish, and those who were foolish took their lamps and took no oil with them. But the wise took oil in their vessels with their lamps, but while the bridegroom was delayed, they all slumbered and slept. And at midnight a cry was heard, behold, the bridegroom is coming, go out to meet him. Then all those virgins rose and trimmed their lamps. And the foolish said to the wise, give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out. But the wise answered, saying, no, lest there should not be enough for us and for you, but go rather to those who sell and buy for yourselves. And while they went to buy, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went in with him to the wedding, and the door was shut. Afterward, the other virgins came also, saying, Lord, Lord, open to us. But he answered and said, assuredly I say to you, I do not know you. Now that's the parable. We'll talk about the conclusion in a minute. But here's what's taking place. Again, going between Jesus using it in this parable, he's using terminology they understand about this feast and how they would go. So what we have taking place here, he says the kingdom of heaven's like that feast. The 10 virgins are wanting to go be part of that feast when the bridegroom comes. But he's delayed. Whatever time he was coming, he's coming later now. So what happens? It says in verse 2, 5 were wise and 5 foolish. Why? Because 5 took extra oil in case of what? In case of delay. They were going to be ready regardless. The 5 foolish took no extra. They had what they had. They were going to have what they had. And if there was delay, they weren't going to be ready for it. So we come down to verse 5, and what happens? There is delay. And so verse 6, the cry comes out, behold, the bridegroom's coming, go out to meet him. So they've been sleeping. They arise in verse 7, and all 10 trim their lamps, and the 5 wise have extra oil, the 5 foolish do not. Now, the foolish ones at this point, their lamps haven't gone out, but they're about to. Yeah, they would be, they're on the verge. They haven't run out yet, but give us some. They're going out. You give us some of your oil so we can have that. The wise said no, and said, you've got to go. There won't be enough for us and you. So you go to those who sell it, and you buy for yourself. So we have ours. That's enough for us. You have yours. They go, but what happens? They don't get back in time, and they're unable to go in. So here's the lesson, verse 13. Watch therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour in which the Son of Man is coming. One of the things I learned in this is it is possible to be prepared and then be unprepared. They were prepared if the bridegroom came to them at the right time. But when he was delayed, he didn't come at the time they expected, they were no longer ready. Another practical lesson I learned in this is we can't get ready for someone else. Now we can teach others so they get ready, but the wise virgins couldn't say, yeah, here's some oil. We're not going to have enough. What do you got to do? Go take care of the problem yourself. You go by and come back. You've got to prepare for yourself. So the point of this is you've got to watch. We don't know when Christ is coming back. That's how we ended 24. That's how we're dealing here in chapter 25. We don't know when He's coming back. We've got to watch, therefore. We've got to be ready at all times. So if He is delayed, again, not as if He's had to postpone it, but He doesn't come when we expect, we're still ready if it's later on. Yes?
These 5 that was prepared but wasn't, on this day fell away. That would be the ones we looked at in Revelation that Jesus said they don't repent, their name's going to be blotted out. So their names would have been blotted out. And we all know people that once were faithful Christians, but they have quit. They're not prepared right now. So they're like these 5 virgins or whatever like that because they didn't endure to the end.
You're right. You know, and again, that's right. That's a warning. Well, we issue from this text. You've got to get ready, but you've got to stay ready. And if you're no longer ready, you got to get ready again, because being ready once doesn't mean you enter in. They were ready once, but not now. Let's go to question number 5. Summarize the parable of the talents. What's the parable of the talents about?
It's about taking what God gives you the capacity to do and utilize them in the kingdom. You know, and I think about people go away and get higher education, vocation, whatever, college or whatever. They demonstrate the capacity to learn in those secular areas. But do we apply ourselves? My point is we can develop talents. You know what I'm saying? You have the talent, but sometimes you've got to put the work in those. But if we don't do these talents, whatever we have the ability to do, we're going to answer to God for not developing those talents.
You're right, Lord willing, and some of what we'll talk about in our sermon tonight, we'll talk a little bit about that concept. But you're right; it's about using what we're given in service to our Master, using the talents we're given. Now, we'll talk about what these talents are in just a minute in this context, but using those, and some of them used them and some of them didn't, and what happened. Now, let's go to verse 14. For the kingdom of heaven. If you've been marking throughout your Bible, all of our occurrences of it is written and all of our occurrences of the kingdom of heaven. We're still not done with it is written. We'll come back to that one later on. But this is 32 of 32 of the phrase the kingdom of heaven. And so if you're marking those, we're done with that one. If you haven't highlighted in advance and you're highlighting as we get to them, this is your final occurrence of the kingdom of heaven. That specific phrase or some other concept, but that specific phrase that occurs 32 times, this is our 32nd occurrence. The kingdom of heaven is like a man traveling to a far country who called his servants and delivered his goods to them. And to one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, to each according to his own ability. And immediately he went on a journey. Now, talents is used here is not about their gifts. Now, he gives according to their abilities. The talent here in this parable was a term for money. In fact, later on he's going to use the term money, and he's using them synonymously, though there's a lot of lessons we learn about the gifts or talents we have to use in this text about not using according to our ability. But he gave each one according to his ability. So one received 5, one received 2, and one received 1. Here's a practical lesson I learned in this. God doesn't give to us what? Does expect of us beyond our ability. Not everybody may be able to do everything or have the ability to do everything. He expects you to use the ability you have. I know the people that said, listen, I can't lead singing or preach, but you know what I can do? I can stand at the door and shake hands and encourage people as they come in and out, or open the door for people and encourage them. That's something I can do. Maybe I don't have the ability to do these other things, or maybe I'm not in a position that I can do those other things, but I do what I have the ability to do. Barnabas was a great preacher who went with Paul on those journeys, but Barnabas' greatest ability was his ability to what? Encourage others. In fact, that's why he's called Barnabas. It means son of encouragement. He took his ability he had and he used it to the best that he could. So the kingdom of heaven is like the one who gives these talents. So verse 16, he who received the 5 talents went and traded with them and made another 5 talents. Likewise, he who had received 2 gained 2 more, but he who had received 1 went and dug in the ground and hid his Lord's money. After a long time, the Lord of those servants came and settled accounts with them. So the first one took his ability that he had, and what did he do with it? He doubled it. He took what he had the ability to do, and he learned, you know what? I have the ability to do more. The one that had 2, he took his ability and he learned to do more. Now, if we're going to parallel this again, I don't think it's specifically about just the talents we have in service to God, but paralleling that with the idea of talents. Somebody might say, you know what? I don't know that I have the talent to do this thing, but I've got the talent to do this other thing over here. But over time of doing this and utilizing my talent, maybe I've learned to develop another talent. Maybe I didn't have that natural ability, if you will, at the beginning, but I've learned to develop and to get that. And so when we talk about talents, that is a possibility. We learn and gain talents as we go. They had ability. They increased in ability. Now, because you have more ability, more is going to be expected to give account of what you have the ability to do. Yes?
We better keep in mind, we may just be lazy. It may not be that we don't Like I said, we may excel in secular matters, something very similar. Maybe I stand in front of people where I work and speak and stuff, but then I can't do that. That's the point. But here's the thing. God knows. Here's the thing. God knows what we have the capacity to do. And we can honestly examine ourselves to see if we're being honest or, we can't do this, we've been lazy. The other thing, I think it was a Hebrew writer said, for a time you ought to be teachers. You have need that someone teach you again. He was addressing somebody that should have been able, at this point in their spiritual life, to teach. But he said, you haven't even basically mastered the basic elementary principles of the Word of God. God knows what we can do. We better know.
You're right, and taking that idea there, somebody may have the physical ability to teach, but maybe at one point they're not spiritually mature, so they're not able to teach yet, but now they've got to develop that talent. They have the physical gift to speak or whatever, but now they've got to develop that talent to get to the point they have that knowledge, which was the problem in Hebrews. Wasn't that they didn't have ability, because they had become sluggish spiritually and dull. They didn't grow as they should to the knowledge to be the teacher. They didn't know what they should have known. Let's go to verse. Now we've covered the first two. The talents are given, how they were managed. We read 19 already, but let's start at verse 20. So he had received 5 talents, is how the accounts were settled. He received 5 talents, came and brought 5 other talents, and said, Lord, you delivered to me 5 talents. Look, I've gained 5 more besides them. And the Lord said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful over a few things. I'll make you rule over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. He who received 2 talents came and said, Lord, you delivered to me 2 talents. Look, I've gained 2 more talents beside them. His Lord said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over a few things. I'll make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. Then he who received the 1 talent came and said, Lord, I knew you'd be a hard man, reaping where you have not sown and gathering where you've not scattered seed. And I was afraid and went and hid your talent in the ground. Look, there you have what is yours. Let's go back now to what was said before. So the first one comes, it's doubled his talent. And he says, well done, good and faithful servant. The second one comes and says, I've doubled the talent. Well done, good and faithful servant. Here's another. We talked about ability. Why the master didn't look at the one that gained 2 and said, well, I know you gained 2, but look, this one over here that had 5 gained 5. Why didn't you gain 5? Well, this one didn't have let's go back to the key here. Let's go back to verse 15. He gave 1 5, another 2, and another 1 to each according to his own ability. So when you give an account, maybe somebody over here, they're able to do some teaching, but they're not somebody in the same position as somebody else over here doing a lot of teaching. Maybe they're not the best at organizing, but they're good at organizing Bible studies. They're good at handing out tracts, handing out material, but maybe they're not the best at teaching an organized class. God's not going to say, well, listen, you didn't teach what this person over here did. No, maybe you didn't have the same ability of this person, but you did what you could with what you had. You used your ability to teach to the best of your knowledge. You're going to give an account for that. But this one over here that had the ability to maybe teach others in a more organized setting, if you will, or more personal, this one's going to have to give an account for his ability. He expects of us what we're capable of doing. Yes?
Don't compare yourselves among yourselves or measure yourselves by yourselves, because when you do this, you are not wise. That's the word of Paul. We're not the standard. It's not a competition. It's the body of Christ working collectively. What one joint lacks, another one supplies.
You're right, and we have a song we've sang a few times, here a number of times on, why am I drawing a blank? We are one, where you serve where I cannot. Maybe somebody over here is really good at teaching, but they're not the best at encouraging. But this person over here, they may not be the best at teaching, but they're really good at encouraging. You don't compare yourself to the teacher to the encourager. Everyone has different abilities. We'll give an account for that. The problem with the man that had 1 was he wasn't willing to use the talent he was given. And yes. Yes, you're right. There's fear that debilitated him from doing so. He said, verse 15, here it is. So his Lord answered him, verse 26, and said, you wicked and lazy servant. You knew that I reap where I've not sown and gather where I've not scattered seed. So you ought to have deposited my money with the bankers, and at my coming I would have received back my own with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to the one who has 10 talents. It says, look, I gave to you what you had the ability to do. The least you could have done was put it in the bank and you'd have drawn interest. Again, remember, while we're talking a lot about talents and the gifts we have, in this parable, he's using talent, and it's a money term. Put it in the bank and draw interest. At least you're doing something with it. You took it and hid it in the ground because you were afraid. Now, I'm going to go back to this statement here. Let's go back to verse 24 for a minute. Who does the master represent? God. And then the three servants are represented by us. Right? We put ourselves in those shoes. So the one says, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you've not sown. So how does that parallel to God? Well, here's the point. Go to verse 27. You ought to have deposited my money with the bankers. At my coming, I'd have received my own with interest. I expected you to take what I gave you and use it. In particular, as we're talking about serving God, use it in service to me. You didn't do that. Now, maybe you didn't have that talent, that natural talent at the beginning, but you developed it. Maybe you learned over time or grew over time, and so you've got more ability now. Okay, that's one thing. But where he's reaping where he hasn't sown, I expect you to use it for me, and you didn't do that. Take what I've given you and use it to grow and use in service to me. That's not what you've done.
In the assembly, or even when I try to evangelize the world, I was afraid to do this. Guess what? That fear is going to send you into hell for eternity.
You're right. We've got to make sure that we're not debilitated by fear, but serving God. Verse 28, so take the talent from him and give it to him who has 10 talents. For to everyone who has, more will be given, and he will have abundance. But for him who does not have, even what he has will be taken away. And cast the unprofitable servant in outer darkness. They'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Use what you've been given. Again, we've said this before. We often say in a society, to whom much is given, much is expected. And much was given, they were expected of them. He didn't expect a whole lot from the man with one talent, but he didn't even use what he had. We'll go to 31 to 46 real quick because our time is getting away from us, so we can finish this chapter here. Verse 31, when the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the holy angels with him, then he'll sit on the throne of his glory. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he'll separate them one from another, as a shepherd divides his sheep from the goats. He will set the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. And the king will say to those on his right hand, come, you blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me. Then the righteous will answer him, saying, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? When did we see you a stranger and take you in, or naked and clothe you? Or when did we see you sick or in prison and come to you? And the king will answer and say to them, assuredly I say to you, inasmuch as you did it to one of the least of these my brethren, you did it to me. Then he will also say to those on the left hand, depart from me, you cursed, into everlasting fire, prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, and you gave me no drink. I was a stranger, and you did not take me in, naked, and you did not clothe me, sick and in prison, and you did not visit me. Then they will answer him, saying, Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison and did not minister to you? Then he will answer them, saying, assuredly I say to you, inasmuch as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did it not to me. I'll get verse 46 in a minute. So here's the point he's making. And I think we learned this going back to the parable of the talents as well. Let's go back to the parable of the talents for a minute. The man with one talent did not use his talent for evil. He just didn't use it what? At all. He didn't use it for good. Here, these people, he doesn't rebuke them for being immoral individuals. He doesn't praise them for their abstinence. Obviously, those on the right had to abstain from things immoral. But what he said was, the things you should have done. Yes, the things you were supposed to do, you omitted to do. And because of that, you're lost for those on the left. To those on the right, the things you should have done, you did them. In fact, the picture here, he says, you did it to me. And the first group looks at him and says, when did we do it to you? And he says, you did it to my brethren, and by doing it to them, you did it unto me. But then he turns to those on the left hand, and he says, you didn't do it. And they say, well, when didn't we do it? You know, I can imagine for a minute the idea is, Lord, if you'd have come and knocked on our door, we would have helped you. Lord, if you'd have been sick and praying, we would have visited you. And the point he makes is, when you didn't do it to my brethren, you didn't do it to me. It wasn't about them being immoral. That's a problem too, and those are lost. But it's about omitting to do the things that are commanded of God. And so he says, you live a certain way. You do certain things. And if we neglect to do those and live that way, then we can be lost. Yes?
I get baptized into Christ, but I don't grow. And the point here is, this is a demonstration of lack of love. If I'm not doing these things, then I don't love you. if I get baptized, but I don't add these things, this and the sick stuff in my life, and I stand before God, then I'm going to go to hell according to this. Is that correct?
Yes.
That's correct, isn't it? Yeah, that's correct. So, people don't want to get out of their comfort zone. Well, Jesus got out of his comfort zone when he left heaven, been there and died on that cross.
You're right, and again, we often talk about, and whether it's these things or anything, I think as we go back, as you talk about, it has to do with a lack of love and the way we reflect ourselves. But take the fruit of the Spirit as an example. Which love is mentioned there, but there's goodness, kindness. There's a lot of things mentioned there. Right before those, he lists a number of things that are the works of the flesh, things you not partake in. But the person guilty of fornication, the person guilty of lasciviousness, the person guilty of murder, and the person that's not kind or doesn't have goodness or doesn't have self-control, they're all lost. But these over here were immoral people. These over here just neglected to be what God demanded of them. Both are lost. We often look at these, and these are what we would view as the heinous sins, if you will, because they're so terrible and immoral, but we're lost at the same time if we neglect to do the things. And again, Galatians, I think, we can see that contrast between the works of the flesh and the fruit of the Spirit. Yes.
The Bible talks about being not conformed to this world, but being transformed by the renewing of your mind. I think sometimes if people would just go visit the sick, if they're not doing that now, maybe everybody in here is doing that. And I'm not just talking about your relatives. I'm talking about everybody. But if we go do that, and it may be out of fear of reading Matthew 25, it's going to send me to hell if I don't. But you go and you interact with these people, and you see what it means. It's not long before you're doing this out of the heart of love.
You're right. It does mean a lot. And when you see that does help grow whatever may keep one from doing it. When you have the opportunity to, and do you see the difference that can make? Lord willing, we'll be in chapter 26 on Wednesday. As I've said, we've been on Tuesday, that day of controversy, for a while. We're finally going to get to move that circle on what day we're on. We're going to move to Thursday now when we get to chapter 26.